our big problem was we didn't know if it would fit into our garage, and so I brought it to our house uh, to do just that, and it did not. It didn't want us to go in the garage. It didn't stop us, but it's all lit up like it were going to crash into something. So it's a little tighter than it normally would be. So,
well, if you keep in mind, I have a Mini Cooper, and two of them, in fact, and they both go off like alarm clocks whenever we go in or out of our garage, and they're a lot smaller than yours. So
yeah.
Yeah, you just have to kind of, and I don't know if there's any way to turn it off because it's very annoying. It's got all these proximity sensors all over the back and the front and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I have to ask, I'm expecting to call, I'm expecting to get a call from from a Tesla dealer today about this. And that's one of the questions I need to
Now, I
ask.
wanted to share with you, Dean, if he comes on, will tell you this. Dean just got himself a Mini Cooper Countryman electric, and it's the newer one. Our electric Mini Cooper, I don't know if you know about the style of a Mini Cooper on the interior, but they have a circle, a big screen that's a circle where Tesla puts their TV or their monitor. And they've been putting that monitor's touchscreen inside that circle space. So that's kind of where they've been doing it. But on the more recent ones, like for mine, which is a 2022, that touchscreen area is in the middle of that circle. It's not the full circle, but you can do any touch screening. You can touch screen in that space. But for the new one that Dean has, the entire circle is sensitive and touch sensitive. And they kind of took away a lot of the hand grip, like for mine, the air conditioning and the radio and all that still classic knobs and buttons and stuff like that. But they've taken that away. They kind of went to the Tesla model, and Dean's kind of not so sure about that because he doesn't like taking his attention away from the road to fuss around with a screen.
Yeah, and there's some of the Tesla functions can be voice activated. I've
Sure.
noticed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking at a picture of the of the circle on those countrymen. That's more appealing than the rectangular thing.
Well, I mean, that circle has been there for years. I mean, I don't think that the original Mini that was before BMW took over, I don't think it had that circle, but BMW, when they started out, I think the first Mini that my girlfriend bought was in 2006. And of course, it wasn't as large. The circle was there. It was kind of the center of attention, and they do a lot of interesting things with that circle. But now it's a screen from edge to edge.
Yeah,
And
it looks like it. Yeah, and it's built into the dashboard. It looks like it's not sticking out on a stick.
No, it's
No,
not.
that's the 2019. Okay, the 2025 it does stick out. Yeah. It
Yeah,
seems like it's not built in. It's not inset into something. It's sort of sticking out a little bit.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that. That's very nice. But I don't want to look at any screen. I just want to take a curl up in the back seat and go home, James.
That's what horses would do back in the day.
Yeah.
When you get so snockered you can't ride your horse. It'll just drive you back home.
Well, the doctors that's what the doctors would do. Traveling doctors, they'd say, well, the horse knows where to go. So we're back to that. Yeah.
Doctors made house calls.
Yeah, that's right. And that it was it was limited because the horse couldn't couldn't give you a bath and put you into bed, but it was pretty good.
Tesla.
Well, you got to keep feeding the damn horse, you know. And right for the immediate thing, we've got to plug in close to where we're going to park the car. So I'm just going to have I'm just going to rely on chargers, local chargers. We'll see how that goes. Anyway,
I remember a conversation with our family doctor in the 1960s. Dad was complaining about Dr. Murdy having bought another Mercedes. Why didn't he buy a Cadillac? And Doc looked at him and said, because the Mercedes has a diesel and I can start it and leave it running all night when it's 30 below.
yeah.
And walk out from my patient and get in a warm car and drive home. And get into bed for 2 hours, leaving it idling in the garage. And he had a fan in the garage. And someone calls, I can go out and get in a warm car and be on my way. He says, I can't do that with a gas car.
Yeah.
I suppose you could, but it'd be a lot more expensive.
So I was on a project in North Dakota where we were installing a big complicated thing, and we had a diesel Suburban, and this was out on ice on a lake kind of.
Yeah.
And we had people they had to assemble something, a big structure, using their bare hands.
Ooh.
And so we had the thing running all the time so people could go in and warm their hands. It was really the only way we could do it. And the wind blows in North Dakota. And it was brutal. And the only people who have advice on that is the Coast Guard on limits on what people can do or what people should do.
Yeah. Fishing boat captains off Alaska.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I saw an interesting video last night on the technique of modifying the props for marine vehicles props and for wind tower props and so forth using dimples like a golf ball.
Oh yeah.
They started out, did some pretty good animation. They started out describing why golf balls work better with dimples and so forth. And then they showed dimpling being used on motorboats that had cavitation. It reduced cavitation. There's a difference between a golf ball because a golf ball is not particularly fluid dynamic like blades are. So there's surface tension drag, and there's also drag that's called suction drag or whatever, because a golf ball is so not dynamic, aerodynamic. It causes a turbulence behind it instead of on the surface. But yeah, they said that the dimpling that they were doing on large merchant ships, the cargo, the container ships, the experiment they did with that actually produced about 2 to 3% reduction in fuel expense.
Wow.
They said was a fairly significant reduction in cost. And yeah, it's an interesting study.
Hey, Tom, are you doing the presentation next week?
David, we can't hear you. I mean, I can hear you enough to know that we can't hear you.
Okay. I was asking H-Tom if he's doing the presentation next week.
I am. They're going to be next week. Okay. I thought it was 2 weeks, but okay, this week. The topic will be the future of hydrogen.
Oh, I've been seeing a lot about that lately.
So have I. And hydrogen is your friend, and it's also your enemy.
Yep. Yep.
And it is not going to be a fill your car up with gasoline thing, if it ever comes. But yes, next Saturday, the future of hydrogen.
It's the 14th, right?
That will be the 14th.
If you want more time, I could do the 14th.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Uh,
I'll do this
can
one.
can you change me to the 14th then
Yep.
for the schedule?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And
Thank you.
the 21st will be hydrogen.
Good morning.
That's what they all tell me.
Good morning.
That's backwards.
Yeah. I have tried reversing my camera. It says, no, I don't want to shut off the video.
I think they'll call it mirroring. You can turn your camera to mirroring.
Video, yeah, I know. But it doesn't seem to work. Video. Turn off. There's that side selfie.
So you see your
Oh, mirror there. They moved it. It's up there now. Mirror my video.
Then you see yourself as you would in a mirror.
Hey,
Still the same.
why did it work this time? Okay.
I don't think it worked.
What did it say? 21st century or something?
21st hydrogen. Top of the page of my notebook.
'21st hydrogen?
Future of hydrogen.
He's going to present the hydrogen presentation on the 21st of June.
Hydrogen as a power source, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cars, airplanes, watercraft, home heating.
A quick question for David. So when you change the meetup, then I'll get a notification for the meetup change.
Probably.
Okay, so you're going to change it so it'll show up on my calendar automatically, I hope.
I don't know how that works. But
Okay, well, I've got to
to
change, but I'll have that other one that shows up. That's not a problem. I'll ignore it.
Let's see. You were going to be the 28th, weren't you?
That's correct.
And now I need somebody for the 28th.
That would be Dean trying to get out of bed. Yeah, I forgot I could get it on my phone, so yeah, I'm about to get up and I'll let it play. Thank you.
Plastics in the future.
Well, for you other electric car guys, I started talking earlier about I took a test drive and I took it home with me because I wasn't sure if it would fit in my garage. Um, and on the way home, I had it do the automatic drive, and it got to the entrance of Highway 36 from a street, and it was a metered situation, and there were two lanes that were not separated by a line. And I think the Tesla wanted to straddle where the line would be, but there were other cars. There were two lanes of cars. And when it got up to the stoplight, it quit. It didn't know to go when it turned green because it's a fast green and then it turns red. I think that's part of it. But it got confused and just the self-driving capability cut off. But then I turned it back on and again, and it took me took me by itself to the dealership returning the car.
You know
It
what
was really cool.
I think that what
So
happened is that on those lights that you get for metering, you
uh-huh.
drove up next to the light. It probably just didn't see the light because it's
Oh,
looking
maybe that's the case. Yeah. Oh,
because it was
maybe.
off to the side, not in front of the car.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so hang back if that happens.
Well, you got to be courteous to your neighbors when you're sitting in a car like that.
Well, you don't have to hang back that far. I mean, it was showing both lights, but they'd flip up and down. It's like, so maybe it was just barely in the sight of the camera.
Well, as they would say in full self-driving AI lingo, that's an edge case that they need to do some training on, I guess.
Sure. There's always training going on.
One of the things that's coming is that smart cars, quote, quote, are going to begin to talk to the lights and make turns without signaling.
Oh,
And you're supposed to just follow the smart car through the intersection.
that's fine if there aren't any other non.
What? What
Yeah.
if I'm not turning? This is I'm not going to say horses were simpler. Horses are complicated.
There's another interesting concept that I would like to see happen, and that is if you have a display or several displays in your car, make one display be the display that would show you the signage that you can take away from the highways now, because all that information can be displayed in your car. So you don't need billboards, you don't need traffic signs. All that stuff can be removed, and your car just basically displays all that information for you.
Well, there's going to be non-smart cars on the highway for a couple decades at least.
Yeah.
And I don't want the car distracting me with billboards, thank you. They can stay outside.
Well, you can probably filter that out with your own preferences, in your preferences.
Maybe for the backseat display.
I don't know if you've ever been there, but I've driven Highway 90 to the Rapid City, South Dakota.
Yeah.
And it's so thick with billboards, they literally cover each other. And as you're driving along, it's like a Venetian blind. You just see one revealing the other.
Yep.
It's especially after Wall Drug. From Wall Drug to Rapid City, it's all these billboards.
Yeah, it's funny is what it is. It is just absurd.
I guess they assume the Badlands are not very scenic, so you don't have to see them.
Well, between Wall Drug and Rapid City, there isn't much to see anyway.
Well, it's there's a beauty it has.
But the beauty is more east of Wall Drug. But
Well, I find driving
West.
between cornfields is very beautiful. So maybe I'm an outlier.
no, you're just a farm boy like me. I like watching fields
Yeah.
or forests.
I remember as a kid, I used to watch from the side window, and I was always fascinated by how near things move by really quickly. Things that are just a little bit further away move by more slowly, and everything in the far background seemed like it was static. And when I did some animation back when I was a college student. I did some cell animation with Crayola and newsprint, and I tried to recreate that effect. That it actually worked out pretty nicely for me. I also remember when my parents finally took me to the Colorado for the first time to see mountains. I kept looking out the window, seeing these huge hay bales, thinking, well, that must be the mountains. And when they finally got me to pay attention to the horizon and I saw the Rockies, I about crapped my pants.
Yeah. You can drive towards them for several days.
Back to the self-driving cars.
Yeah.
With the entrance ramps that have two lights, one on each side, I don't know how the car could decide which light to obey.
Yeah, and it was funny
because could negotiate that at all.
It was funny that it was I mean both lights were going up and down on the screen. Both lights were going up and down, flashing up and down. And that in combination with such a short green light, because it's really just a flash.
You take the light that is in the lane you are in.
Yeah,
well,
but
the
camera saw both of them.
No,
the car may not put itself in one of the lanes, and maybe between the lanes. I mean,
yeah, it wanted to be in the middle. If there were no other cars there, because there was no divider lane, there was no divider strip of paint. It was trying to go to, I think it was trying to go to, it couldn't decide which lane to be in, but there was no divider lane dividing there.
Well, when I come to those, if there are no cars in front of me, I just go right down the middle and take the first green light, whichever it is.
Well, yeah, that's true. But when there's two lines of cars,
when there are cars, that's a problem.
Then you pick your lane, and the car, I would think, would know if there was a car to its right or to its left.
It certainly did. It certainly did that, but it was confused, I think, by the lights, because it was like going up and down. But each one was going up and down on the screen. So maybe it is because it's a little bit too outside of the view of it, but it saw them. But it was just different.
It is 10 o'clock, and Carole.
Yeah, Carole.
For us. How would you like questions, Carole?
How would I like questions?
Do you want to do it as a presentation, or do you want hands raised during your presentation?
David, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Do you want questions during the presentation, or do you want to do the whole thing and then take questions?
No, I would like to take questions during the presentation, but I'd like to have somebody else. In other words, I will.
Okay, I can do that.
I will present a screen or two, and then I will say, okay, do we have any questions about that? And I would hope that Tom, you'll be watching for questions and call on them?
Yeah, I can do that.
Carole, do you have any videos you need me to show?
No, I have no videos I'm going to be showing. I have some information that I'm going to be breaking out of PowerPoint to show, but
Okay.
I
That
will be
sounds good.
putting it up on the screen.
Okay, Stan, you're recording, right?
Yes.
All right, let's see if I can. Hmm.
Okay, while you're doing that, Carol, I have put you set up for next week, Warren.
Okay.
Tom and Eric, I have both of you scheduled, I think, for the next week, so we'll have to work that out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Oh, I'm scheduled for the 21st, I thought, because I got a
Okay.
Father's Day thing to go to next week.
That'll work. If you can do the 28th, Tom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So far as I know.
Okay. Well, I seem to have lost my there we go. Now I would like to get you back to, yes, there we go. Okay. Now,
Got it.
am I sharing at this point?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Now, presumably you have all read the preview that was listed along with the picture. And so we will get right into what this is about. And I am talking about the surprising revelations. And this is all post the year 2000. Basically, the whole concept of big data and what can be concluded from analysis of it only started after the year 2000. So this is recent stuff, 25 years. And we're talking about mining the internet for insight into the human psyche and for useful predictions. Okay, now, the first time that I ran into the notion of big data and Google tools and what they were and what they could be used for was a couple of years ago when the late and somewhat lamented days of Jason's often bi-monthly presentations. Everybody remembers when Jason was basically doing every other presentation. And there was a particular one. Now, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
Yes.
problems with audio. Okay. There was a particular one where Jason was arguing with people about the phrase Judeo-Christian tradition. And he was saying that our nation had been founded on this concept. And, you know, the whole idea went back to before the adoption of the Constitution. It was foundational to the American nation. And, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, damn it, I don't remember ever encountering the phrase or the concept before the 1980s. Now, that's a problem that I often ran into with Jason, in that he had a tendency to think that whatever social trends had been going on since he was born, or since he began to notice things, had always been that way. Whereas those of us who were 30 or 40 years older than Jason sometimes realized that many concepts had entered the popular imagination not forever ago, but just before Jason was born. So in my own particular experience, the first time I could ever remember seeing the phrase Judeo-Christian tradition was a sign on the wall of a hospital waiting room. And this was in the early 80s, and my kid was in the hospital having his tonsils out. And I was sitting in, those somewhat private waiting rooms that they have for the family of people who are being operated on to wait in. And then the doc comes out and tells you, the kid's fine, he's waking up now, and you'll be able to take him home in a couple of hours. So I'm sitting in this waiting room, and I'm the only one there, and I had brought a book with me, but I was kind of nervous, and so I ended up walking around looking at stuff that was posted on the walls. And, along with signs, pointing to exit and obstetrics and things like that, were a nice little sign that said that, this hospital didn't discriminate on the basis of this, that, or the other, and all of these sort of, that they kept your data private, and all the good things that hospitals want you to know about them. And included in there was that, we stand firmly in the Judeo-Christian tradition of help for sick people. Okay? But that my very first encounter with this concept or this phrase dated from the 1980s. Whereas Jason was saying, it's been around since the founding. So I get out on the internet and just start searching for the phrase Judeo-Christian tradition on Google. And led me many articles. But the most interesting one mostly for what it told me about Google Utilities, was an article by a modern Australian theologian who was talking about the history of the concept of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And he used a Google utility that I didn't know existed called NGram to research the frequency of that phrase in all the books published in American English or in British English over a time that dated back to the 1880s, from the 1880s to the present. And I had no idea that NGram existed. I mean, I thought that all you could do on Google was look up articles, you know. And so now I'm going to see if we're going to have to break out of we're going to have to break out of
PowerPoint.
I would just copy that link and bring up a new tab
yes,
and paste it into there.
that's what I am going to do.
There's a lot of promise about Ukrainian NATO. There's a lot of promise about you.
Say again. I didn't quite catch that last statement.
That was audio coming up on your computer, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I have tried this before. Let's see what I can do with it.
While she's doing that, I don't have my hand up, but I'll make a quick comment anyway. Many of the founders of our nation were not Christians or Jews, but were deists. That is, they believed in God, but they were not Christians. Thomas Jefferson is one example.
Yes, and as this article explains, that the notion of the Judeo-Christian tradition was created by people who wanted to talk about a belief in God that was not specifically the Christian God or the Jewish God or the Muslim God, or, you know, they wanted to talk about this particular shared tradition. And I think that would include your theists.
Deists, D-E-I-S-T.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking of theist.
Nope. Almost everyone back then believed in God because they had no idea of modern scientific concepts of the beginning of the universe, which are still in flux, of course. But they thought of the universe in terms of there had to be a creator. And of course, being humans, they put the creator into human form.
Well, what would you say the difference would be between a deist and a theist?
I'm not sure exactly.
Ann has his hand up.
I could Google it.
Deists only think of God as the initial movement or the ontological starting point.
Right, and the theist keeps meddling in human affairs.
And theists believe that God interferes or intervenes and answers prayer and is involved in your life on a daily basis.
Right.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right.
Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Move, please. Get out.
Carole? It is, are you making the case that, well, no, I'm not going to say it that way. The influence of Judeo-Christian beliefs on culture could precede by millennium the usage of that term. The fact that the term didn't occur until 100 years ago doesn't mean that the influence of the tradition doesn't produce the foundation of American culture. Do you agree?
Carole?
I'm
Thinking about it.
no, not really. I think that the concept, particularly as explained in some of these articles, demanded the wording. Because it basically had not occurred to people before this wording became in use.
Recording in progress.
To think of the combination, you know, even though, I mean, basically, the Old Testament is pretty much the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament is the Christian, still, I think in this particular case, the wording went along with the concept. As is explained, and let me see if I can now share. Okay. Now, are you guys getting
Yes.
This
the
is from
picture of
ABC.
Moses on the,
Movie
you're seeing?
Moses is in the movie theater.
Okay. Now, this was the particular article that I found most interesting. And I'm just going to look at the most basic bit in the first couple of, okay. Now, can you all read these first couple of paragraphs, or
Pretty small.
should I read them to you?
Tiny font.
Do a control plus on your computer.
Control plus.
Okay,
Or plus or whatever you got.
let me just read it.
No. Do a control plus. It would be much faster if we read it ourselves.
Okay,
And I'm sorry, I've already know there are links to all this stuff, correct, Carole? You know, when I went into meetup and
Control plus is not doing anything, but
you got to make sure you're tapped on that screen. Get the focus on that screen,
okay.
and then try Control plus or Command plus.
There it goes.
It's working. It's working. It's working.
Keep going.
It got bigger.
Do it again.
Do it again 3-4 times.
That's it. That's good enough for me.
Now that's good enough. I don't even have glasses on. Yay!
Now,
if you want to get rid of that, Control minus will take you back, Carole.
Control zero. Control 0 will bring you back to normal screen.
Okay.
thank you. Now, basically, I am only interested in this article as far down as Google NGram. So, read what it says. And then he is talking about using this particular utility, which I had never heard of, to give a historical viewpoint of this phrase as appearing in published books in English. And let's see.
I can see that about 1935 is when it came into use. That's about the time they put "In God We Trust" on our coins, on our currency. And
Okay, so
I believe you're right.
we can see here, now you can all see this graph?
Here's the chart.
Okay. That basically, this phrase started to be used after World War II to in opposition to the extreme anti-Semitism that had been part of the Nazi regime. In other words, they were looking for a way to say anti-Semitism is not part of Western civilization, damn it. And the way this was expressed was in talking about the Judeo-Christian tradition as one thing. And if you go much further in that article, it turns out that the first use of that phrase by an American was President Eisenhower in a speech. So, and it was a post-World War II speech, obviously. He wasn't a president before that. Now, it looks like we've got a bunch of questions. So, Tom, you want to call on people?
yeah, go ahead, Stan.
Eric had his hand up first.
Okay.
First.
I haven't trusted, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I haven't trusted Google since they started showing founding fathers and Nazi leaders as blacks and popes as women. So I just checked with Grok, and it says a paragraph here. The phrase Judeo-Christian tradition emerged in the early 19th century, but gained widespread usage in the United States during the 20th century, particularly in the 1940s and 50s. It was initially used in theological and scholarly contexts to describe shared ethical and religious values between Judaism and Christianity, often emphasizing their common roots in the Hebrew Bible. The term became more prominent during World War II and the Cold War, when it was employed in American political and cultural discourse to unify Jewish and Christian communities against perceived threats like Nazism and communism. By the 1950s, it was commonly invoked to underscore a shared moral framework in Western civilization, especially in contrast to secular or atheistic ideologies. That's it.
Okay, I believe that is totally congruent with what we're seeing here. And eventually, yeah, this big peak here, you are correct that it was at first pointing up the Nazis and the communists as outliers to Western civilization. But right about in here, it started including Muslims as outside of Western civilization, even though, you know, the the Jewish, the Christian, and the Muslim religions are all Abrahamic religions and to some extent have common origins. A very strong attempt to use the notion of Judeo-Christian as the good guys to look at the to include the Muslims in the bad guys. Okay, Tom, you want to look at all those questions?
Well, Dean is next.
Next, yeah. So I could do an hour. Yeah, Judeo-Christian, Jesus was a Jew. We all know that. And Muhammad was late to the table by what, 850 years?
Yeah.
And would anyone, can anyone, and I do not hate Muslims at all. I have watched hours and hours of the origins of Muslim and all of that. But can anyone disagree with the fact that if Muhammad hadn't been aborted or never been born or been miscarried, we wouldn't recognize the world today? Islam, for better and for worse, has had a huge, major effect on the world map, the world politic, the world everything else. I mean, we had enough in Ireland between the Protestants and the Catholics. That's pretty much buried now. And we have yet to bury the dichotomy between Islam and Judeo-Christian, let's call it that, because for the most part, the Jewish faith, and I'm sorry, my speech is slurred. I'm taking triple pain medications for severe back.
Oh dear.
Has pretty much, oh yeah, you don't want to know. Has pretty much been buried. And we have yet to reconcile with Islam. It won't happen in my lifetime. It won't happen in your grandkids' lifetime. Well, maybe,
Well,
possibly.
if you want my personal opinion,
I do.
Islam has one flaw that will keep it as a problematic outsider religion. And that is the theological approval of polygyny. That is one man being allowed at least 4 wives.
Well, we got our Mormons, but that's...
Yes, but we very carefully got rid of the Mormons.
Well,
there
are people in southern and Nevada with 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 wives.
Yes, but the United States, when Utah was petitioning to become a state, basically told them that Utah could not enter the Union as a state until the Mormon religion officially repudiated polygyny.
And they did it for political and economic and all kind of other reasons.
And my belief is that polygynous societies tend to be extremely militaristic and always fighting with their neighbors because it's mathematics. For every man who has 4 wives, there are 3 men who have no wife.
Exactly. It's a form of elitism, as in the wealthy have a lot of wives, they have a lot of Teslas, they have a lot of cars, and what about the rest of us? Yeah.
And so you have, and it is, generally speaking, the younger men who are not having any wives. You have got this enormous, like up to 3/4 of the male population desperate for women.
Yep.
And they will tend to bring down the society they're part of,
Yep.
unless the society they're part of tosses them into the army and says, go fight our neighbors. You can get some women there.
Right. Exactly. And the old thing, one man, one woman, and all that is just mathematics.
Exactly.
Darwinian
So
mathematics.
it is my contention that the problem with Islam as a religion is the problem that they always end up fighting their neighbors.
Well, wait a minute. They fight each other. They haven't settled the Shiite Sunni problem yet.
Well, yeah, but that's the same.
Settled, then come
That's
and
the same as the Catholic Protestant
joining the
thing.
human.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll lower my hand.
Yeah, but that is my personal opinion as to why they are a different and problematical type of religion.
And you are, I'll shut up now. You are spot on to me, Carole, as usual.
Okay, Stan's next.
Well, I'm looking at the timeline for this the elevation of the blue line. I just did a quick research. The Scopes trial occurred in 1925, and that blue line seems to be elevating at the same time frame as the rise of radio and broadcast.
About 1935, yeah.
And I'm going to cite Mark Twain and another character some of you may not know about, Robert Green Ingersoll, who were very well known for being able to go to any city in America and draw huge crowds who were kind of leaning towards a sophisticated sense of secularism in terms of their view of the world view. And you could probably draw a line from that and say, well, we should be kind of behind religion and dogma and mystery religion and so forth could kind of be behind us now if it weren't for the put your hands on the radio style of evangelical Christian fundamentalism, which came up with the radio. I mean, Hitler used it and FDR used it as well. So it was a very handy tool for mass manipulation, but it kind of had that side effect of allowing emotional dogma to sort of become mainstream once again.
And I don't want to get too terribly into the extremes of this particular thing, because this is basically just an example of an extremely useful Google tool on big data. If that, this was my first encounter with big data. I had no notion of the fact that you could do this sort of research before I encountered this article. So let's not go, really heavily into the intricacies of this article, but everybody have their say, but don't, know what I mean?
Yes,
It's just an example.
I was going to suggest that the topic of your talk, Everybody Lies, has to go far beyond this one issue.
Right.
But I did want to make one comment on that graph. That first peak starts around 1935, which I can believe would be a response to Nazism. The Nazis claimed to be Christians when they first started out, but not Jews. They promoted the Aryan culture. That Jesus was an Aryan, and they But after they started gaining more power, they started limiting the power of the Christian church as much as they could. So
Yes.
it was very, but I think that's why this first peak came about.
And sorry, Hitler was not an Aryan, he was a wannabe Aryan.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but yes, I mean, this is very definitely described in the article as a response to the Nazi problem.
Yeah.
This whole first peak.
Okay,
And
yeah,
then-
next is H. Tom.
Then this peak was a response to us seeing the Muslims as our
The
chief enemy.
But it does
Yeah.
make sense that the term Judeo-Christian that we were talking about would become popular around that time as a response to the
Yes.
Nazis.
And as I say, if you go further into this article, it mentions that the first significant use of Judeo-Christian was by President Eisenhower in a speech.
Mm-hmm.
But it obviously was used well before that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was in printed material.
Okay.
But this was the first big. Practically everybody would hear that speech and be introduced to that concept by the fact that President Eisenhower used it.
Okay. H. Tom.
I was going to, well, I have several things. Now, this beginning of the second peak, I attribute to going off the gold standard.
Okay, and now
One was,
are
don't
you
trust.
talking about this one?
Yeah.
Not this
Not, no, the middle one.
one. Okay. And you
1970,
attribute that to going off the gold standard.
going out the gold standard in 1971, and it was don't trust gold, trust the government. Trust in God. You can't trust the government anymore. Mohammed and Christ are interesting in a way. There's a little book called Jefferson's Bible, where he took and collected everything that Christ was said to have said by 4 prophets. And when you compare that to what has been built as Christianity, there are some differences. And I have heard, but not seen, that someone has done the same thing to Muhammad. That what he was preaching in his own words, and what the scholars have built out of that, just like the prophets have built out of Christ, has become something very different. There was no claim that they were, Christ and Muhammad were saying the same thing or anything like that, but both large religions have left their founders far behind.
In other words, or Jefferson would distinguish between the Sermon on the Mount, which was supposedly the word, and St. Paul's letters to the believers.
Yep,
that makes sense.
And part of this is in the 60s, might have been before then, but definitely in the 60s, radio stations broadcast church services on Sunday morning. I know this because our church in Aberdeen was one of the 4 or 5 churches that on a rotating schedule, our 10 o'clock sermon went out over KSDN.
And certainly we went back to that during the worst of the COVID epidemic.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris.
As we move along, I would say there are two things we need to keep in mind. One is the veracity of the data, where it comes from, how it's collected, et cetera, et cetera. And the other is the interpretation of the data. Even if the data is 100% accurate, which is probably rarely the case,
And I believe
the interpretation of the data is fraught with difficulty. And we should keep that in mind as we're interpreting. It's probably rarely the case that any one thing is due to one variable. So just a little thing to be aware of as we proceed.
yes. And many of these points are made by the article later on. But as I say, mostly I wanted to talk about this because the notion of NGram as a utility for finding things out was my very first introduction to big data analysis. So, maybe we should, does anybody else have anything to say about this?
I will say one other thing. The NGram is probably a measure of conscious awareness, but most of human activity occurs in the unconscious. And just because something suddenly becomes part of conscious awareness doesn't mean that it hasn't existed in the unconscious. The unconscious hasn't been aware of it for a long time.
And NGram only applies to printed books in English. I mean, it isn't even looking at Google searches.
Dean, you have your hand up. You have something quick?
About 10 things. Let me sort it out. Yeah, so only English books are monitored or absorbed by NGram, correct? Well, then they're missing whatever percentage of the world. Yeah.
Well, okay. No, in this particular article, it only looked at books in English. I believe that NGram can be applied to books in other languages, but
Right. And I will repeat what I've said 100 times, and I'll say it till the day I die. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. But this is a very fascinating, language and the radio and now the TV and now the internet and now what's trending. They are really the most important thing. Until it enters the language, it is not real. And when it enters the language, whether it be print or radio or TV or Instagram or, I go to Home Depot. I want to buy a valve. What's trending? I don't give a damn what's trending. I want to buy a valve. All right, I'll shut up.
Yeah, our thoughts shape our language and our language shapes our thoughts.
yes, certainly, overwhelmingly. And there are things that you can say in English that you cannot say in Arabic and vice versa.
Right, and one more thing, and I learned this years ago. If you listen to a spoken language and hear the what's the word, intonation or the whatever, you can judge what that society is like. As in German is Achtung, da, 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 da. Well, that is their culture, and Chinese, many Asian countries are a bit like that too. The French are the exact opposite. It gives you a, I won't say the word, but it, it's very melodic, and that's why they have never and will never win a war.
The French? How about Napoleon?
Yeah,
Corsican.
That's what
Let's get back on
He
topic.
led the French army.
Let's get back on topic.
No, I love the French. Trust me. I mean, English would not be the language it is without French.
Okay,
But remember that France was originally was called Gaul, which were Celtic Celtics, and then whoever.
Gallia est omnia in partes trias.
Yes.
Yeah.
Only thing I enjoyed in Latin was reading Caesar's
all
Gaul.
Gaul is divided into
Okay, Carole, go ahead.
Do we have any more?
No, go ahead, please.
Great. Okay, let's get out of this and back to my, damn it, I'm spacing on the word. The P word for
Your presentation.
What?
Your presentation?
No, the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. So let's get out of that. And back to come on, I never find share.
At the bottom.
Yeah, well, it's under more on mine now. Okay, does that have us back there?
Yes.
Great. Now, having gotten my first introduction to Google utilities that tell you interesting things about big data, we now go on to this book, which I have only discovered within this year, but it was written in 2017 by a poor hyphenated fellow named Seth Steven-Davidowitz. And the book was titled Everybody Lies, which I always thought Dr. House invented, but that's the title of the book. And the subtitle here says, Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are. And then we have an elephant pretending to be a zebra. Okay. Now, the introduction to Everybody Lies, Seth describes his encounter with Google Trends, which is yet another utility. It was a tool that was released in 2009. So it was considerably later than the NGram. And at the time of release, it was considered trivial. People, Google thought people would use it to see what was trending in fashion, what was trending in books, just look around and see what everybody's doing and see if it interests you. And this next is a direct quote from the introduction of Everybody Lies. And he says, at the time, Google search data didn't seem to be a proper source of information for serious academic research. Unlike surveys, Google search data was not created as a way to help us understand the human psyche. Google was invented so that people could learn about the world, not so that researchers could learn about people. But it turns out the trails we leave as we seek knowledge on the internet are tremendously revealing. In other words, people's search for information is in itself information. When and where they search for facts, quotes, jokes, places, persons, things, or help, it turns out can tell us a lot more about what they really think, really desire, really fear, and really do than anyone might have guessed. The everyday act of typing a word or phrase into a rectangular white box leaves a small trace of truth that, when multiplied by millions, eventually reveals profound realities. And that is the essential thesis of this book. He is attempting to show that people lie in surveys. People lie to themselves. People lie about everything. And so it becomes very difficult to use polls or surveys as prediction. And basically, he goes on to show that an analysis of Google data can do two things. And the first is explanation. The second is prediction. And the first example that he gives of explanation is absolutely fascinating. And it's a long discussion as to why, when all the polls were predicting that Clinton would win over Trump, the opposite happened. And what he shows in the book is that the polls were showing that America was essentially a post-racist society. Racism was not important in predicting elections, predicting anything. We had done with that. And electing Barack Obama was an obvious example, you know? The country was over racism. This is what all the surveys showed. It was what all the polls showed. And what he shows in here is that Obama basically squeaked by because the year was just extremely good for Democrats for several other reasons. And those several other reasons managed to overcome the extreme racism that still exists in this country. But by the time we got to Trump versus Clinton, the racism was showing up in full force. Now, the way he researched this was to look at massive amounts of data searches that went into Google leading up to the election. And this was the Trump versus Hillary Clinton election. And he started out searching on the term nigger, or the same search included the plural niggers. And he found overwhelming racism in the country, almost as great amongst Democrats as amongst Republicans. And one of the comments he makes is that, you know, if you base it on searches for jokes about niggers or niggers voting, or, you know, any of these searches, it is very nearly as common amongst Democrats as amongst Republicans. But the only difference is that the Republicans are a little more likely to admit it, you know, publicly, that they are racists. Couple of other things he noted was that racism was the single greatest correlation of states and counties and whatever that went for Trump. In other words, the degree of racism in a state correlated beautifully with Trump winning that state. And nothing else did. I mean, they were checking for gun ownership and Republicans versus Democrats and all kinds of stuff. And nothing correlated as well as racism for whether people voted for Trump or not. He also points out that the map of where racism is heaviest was not quite as had been expected of North versus South. It was more likely East versus West. That statistically speaking, there was not a lot of racism west of the Mississippi, whereas lots and lots of it in upstate New York and Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania and, places you wouldn't expect it. And one of the really, really interesting things that came out of this analysis was that when you were trying to figure out to predict who people were going to vote for, in addition to it correlating very well with racism in the case of Trump, it was also true that in searches for information about the candidates that included both candidates' names, searches like Trump Clinton ideology or Trump Clinton voters or, any sort of search for information that included both candidates' names, you could find a beautiful correlation as to who eventually got most of the vote by which order the names showed up in. In other words, a search on Trump Clinton was most often from someone who would eventually vote for Trump. A search for Clinton Trump was most often a search from someone who was eventually going to vote for Clinton. And I found that fascinating. Oh boy, we got lots and lots of...
I find that duh, but yeah, when you're done, Carole, I love listening to you.
Well, I think it's time to take questions on this particular bit.
Okay, go ahead, Dean.
All right, yeah, so upstate New York, I lived and worked up there for 3, 4, 5 months. And no, it's very fascinating. I had a good friend from Buffalo who was black, moved to San Diego, and was a DJ and a lot of other things. And yeah, Buffalo is where they put their black folk. It just is. It's fascinating. I went over there and I loved it because I love the black culture. Yeah, the search thing. I mean, doesn't everybody know that every time you type something in DuckDuckGo or Google or whatever you guys use, you'll see really people are searching for this, and you instantly get a glimpse at I think is a proper use of the word, the zeitgeist, what is going on in people's minds. And when people type into a search bar, they think they're anonymous. Oh, no, they're not. That is the poll today. We are in a post-poll society, and it is known and proven and can be demonstrated that conservatives tend to be conservative when it comes to polls. Liberals tend to become liberal, as in giving out information, and conservatives tend to play it closer to their belt. And that is why that 11-point lead for Hillary evaporated, and probably half of it was that moron James Comey, who, if I ever saw him in an airport, we would have words. Yeah. Well, I'm going to do something the FBI has never ever done before in the history of the FBI. Okay, but I thought it was important. Yeah, you moron, shut up. Anyway, yeah, no, that search, and I've heard that same thing. How you collect information, Google et al. is what are people looking for and how are they looking for it? And that is how you get inside their brains, even though they don't know. And that's people are in jail because of their Google searches, literally. You were searching for child porn. You were searching for, yeah, boom. You put that in front of a jury, you go into the slammer.
Okay, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I have two things. One is Plato's ring of invisibility. And he said if a person had a ring that made them invisible, which really makes them have no consequence to their actions, that no one could be trusted. Now, in the early days of the internet, people thought, and some people still probably still do, that they were anonymous. So that is basically Plato's ring of invisibility, and they can't be trusted for what they're saying. It's not a revelation of who they really are. It's who they are if they're wearing a ring of invisibility. So that data is a little bit suspect. The original data, any data where a person think they're anonymous or used to think they're anonymous is probably a little bit suspect. The other thing I want to say is there is an absolutely terrific, brilliant book called The Folly of Fools by Richard Trivers, who is a world-class evolutionary biologist.
Say again,
it is a
folly of what?
The Folly of Fools.
Got it.
Brilliant book, brilliant. It's about deception. And he says there is evolutionary benefits for deception. Every animal in the animal kingdom practices deception. Cats arch their back to make them seem bigger than they are, etc., etc. It is an adaptive advantage to deceive someone. Every animal does it. Now, there's also an adaptive advantage for deception detection. And every animal tries to detect deception. So there's this arms race between deception and deception detection that increases the subtlety of deception and increases the subtlety of deception detection. The ultimate method of detection of deception, the ultimate measure of deception is for someone to lie to themselves. A self-deception. A human being lying to somebody else will run the risk of being detected as a liar. There will be involuntary reactions, the tone of their voice, etc., like that. But if a person deceives themselves, then that increases their ability to be able to lie without deception. And that is very common among humans. Everybody lies. Some people lie to themselves first and then lie to everybody else. And this is not a bug. This is a feature. It is hugely adaptive to be able to be able to deceive somebody. It's an absolutely terrific book, Folly of Fools.
Yeah.
Dan.
I think that the side that I'm going to go to on this is a Freudian concept of ambivalence, where we all have high and low esteem for practically everybody in our that we know, whether it's your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, maybe you're even your kids. You have this grand. I remember I used to tell my mom, there's grandstand and there's damn stand. We all have this dual-sided character to ourselves, the hero villain thing, or even go to look at the theater symbol, the smile and the frown. It's just part of human emotional dynamics, that you have this high-low kind of thing going on. And I think that it's very it's not going to really work if you try to assign a high tag to X number of people and a low tag to X number of people and make that stick, especially if they're in a system or a society where people know better.
Yeah.
So
hence the phrase appeal to our better natures.
Yeah, that's kind of what cartoons. I mean, Stan Lee was smart to invent Clark Kent and Spider-Man to sort of capture this dynamic. And I remember teaching a lot of computer animation and doing a lot of gaming. There are kids that are just raised on the cartoon culture. Look at how successful these cartoon movies are in the theaters, where you have heroes that come along and solve the problems. And then they have huge celebrations, and they're given triumphs and so forth. And then they go off into the sunset. They wake up the next morning and they think, what did I just do? I don't know. But that's a dynamic that you kind of have to be watchful for.
Hey, Dean, you're next.
You're muted, Dean.
Let me defer to Eric's hand and then come back to me, please.
I'm afraid there's a definite demonstrable trend now, and I think it can be made up as argued as a correlation of laws of evolution, that all governments of all kinds have a tendency to maintain their power both internally and against other governments, will have a strong tendency now to surveil their populations as much as they can get away with. I don't have a solution. It's unpleasant, but I don't have a solution.
Yeah, look at Doge. That's what they're doing, stealing all our data.
Well, you think the left did?
Okay, Dean.
And let me let me defer to H. Tom, please, and then I'll come back to me.
Okay, Tom.
Oh, I was just going to say that when I see something that says, when all polls predict, I just shake my head, because they've left out a word. They mean to, or they think, when all of the reliable polls think. And they get blindsided every time. And there are so many ways to influence poll results when you're taking the poll, that there should be a name for that science, because they know how to
framing.
It's just yeah,
probably.
Okay, Dean again.
H. Tom is done.
Yeah, I think.
All right. So I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. From the time I was probably 8, 10 years old, if I have a Messiah, it's Charles Darwin. And if I have a Bible, it's On the Origin of the Species. And so we have two properties. We have a rental with a 5-foot fence. Our first tenant for what, eight years was a black guy. And he said, what are two white boys doing in this neighborhood? Because we then were 98% black. Now we're maybe 20% Hispanic, and a couple of white boys left. Most of them have died. And so anyway, we had a dog, Brian, great dog, and he loved our tenant Art. But when Art would come, we had a 5-foot fence between the properties. When Art would come over at the fence, he'd see us out in the backyard mowing the lawn or whatever. Brian would come out and he would bark at Art. And that is xenophobia, fear of the other. And, in my neighborhood, black folk who own pit bulls or whatever will bark at me because you don't look like us, right? And that is hardwired even into dogs. And just as, especially in males, because of testosterone poisoning, thank you, Debbie, for that phrase. Just as murder and rape are hardwired, especially into the male version of the species. And society only exists because we have learned how to, for the most part, rein that in. That is our Darwinian imperative. If you, what did Debbie used to say? If you excuse my language, if you can't F it and you can't eat it, then you kill it, or you kill it and then you eat it, and that's just true, unfortunately. But it is. But yeah. Anyway, I want to hear what Stan has to follow up with.
Well, the only thing I can think of that's maybe more challenging to overcome than racism is misogyny.
Yeah.
Well, wait. Let me interrupt, drop back in. And, it astounded me, absolutely floored me that we elected a black president before we elected a female president. We are maybe the most misogynistic major country on the face of the planet. Absolutely blew my mind. I would vote for my mother for president. I mean, why would you not?
Nope. I have known this most of my life, and I firmly predict that, okay, there was 50 years between the time that Black males got the vote in this country and the time that women, white or black, got the vote in this country.
Yep.
And I firmly predict that it will be 50 years from the election of President Obama to the election of the first female president.
That's a good prediction.
Better that you're projecting, yeah.
Yeah. And there was something else. Geez Louise. God, don't get old and don't be on 2 pain meds or 3.
Let's get back on topic.
Well, now, one interesting thing that came out of this particular explanation, which I think is kind of an example of lying to yourself, is that many more people said in surveys that they were going to vote, that they firmly planned to vote when surveyed, and then did vote. And it turns out that there's a very good predictor as to whether someone is actually going to vote. And or where statistically significant groups of people are actually going to vote. And that is searches for where to vote or how to vote, or, searches for information on voting in the weeks and months previous to the election are a very good predictor of turnout. And that was something that surprised me. Dean, are you there again?
Rejoined my thought. So this is pretty much a known fact. The reason that Donald Trump won, ironically, was black males and male Hispanics who, surprisingly, in large numbers, voted for Trump. We'll call that misogyny, we'll call that testosterone, I don't know. But they did, and they do. And the people who are statistically the toughest on immigration are Hispanic males. I'm in, you're out.
Especially in Florida.
Yeah.
Oh, Tom, go ahead. Tom?
Hello?
There's part of the thing about turnout and requests for voting locations depends on how frequently voting locations are moved. Our voting location has moved every election for the last 15 years.
Wow.
Every election.
It's because it's what Republicans do. That is their strategy.
I don't know what no, actually, this is all being done by the state as they have shuffled we live on a border of several districts, and as they move this precinct to this from this precinct to this district, it just keeps bouncing around. Right. I should say it's not every election. Right. But I don't think we have gone 3 times in a row to the same place.
Mine has moved I've been here 15 years and moved about 3 times. And it has to do with the election. I always voted in person. Actually, I would fill out my ballot, mail in, and I would drop it off in the polling place, which was the garage around the corner. And I thought that made me feel democratic and American. And yeah, because people are going more and more mail-in, et cetera, then they're consolidating, and then it went to a church, and then it went to a library, and I don't even know where it is now. I've given up. I mail it back.
Okay, what do you have now, Carole? What's next?
Okay. I will mention on the subject of misogyny that Trump has only won when his opponent was female. You notice Trump had 1 term, and then he lost to Biden, and then he had another term, and in both cases where he won, the opponent was female.
True.
Okay, now that is an example of using big data and the analysis thereof to explain things. He has many, many, many very interesting and sometimes very counterintuitive other examples of explanation. One of them that I found interesting was that the single greatest predictor of whether a basketball player is going to make it into the NBA is height. And he actually came up with a formula that every inch of height gives you, you know, if you're a basketball player, gives you this much more possibility of making it into the NBA. And
Yep, makes sense.
yeah, just things like that. Well, I mean, you would think that you know, capability of play in college would, I don't know, be heavier, or I would have. Okay, so lots and lots of explanations. And then he went on to straightforward predictions. And wait a minute. Do I have a couple of people who still have their hands up?
Well, yeah, you do.
I can wait till the next slide.
One quick comment.
No, real quick. Why is it unexpected racism, which is apparently spelled incorrectly? Why is it unexpected? What? Racism is unexpected? Duh.
Well, because all of the surveys were indicating low levels of racism.
And surveys are crap.
Well, but all the predictions, and basically every single prediction, was that Trump would lose. And those predictions were based on the polls and the surveys. That's why it says unexpected racism.
Stan?
Sense?
The comment about the NBA is a colleague of mine says the difference between the WNBA and the NBA is that the NBA is vertical and the WNBA is horizontal. And I think that watching
And you are partially wrong. Caitlin Clark and the other gal, they are pretty darn tall.
Well, they don't dunk. Dunking is a big part of the vertical game.
Which is why I watch women's basketball as opposed to men's, because I hate the dunk.
By horizontal, you mean more teamwork, passing, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that in the men's game now, too.
Yeah.
They've learned from the women.
Yeah, but there's dunking. Dunking is really critical for the guys.
Okay, Carole.
Okay.
We're going to do a prediction now?
Yes, we are into prediction. And one of the examples he gave was just flabbergasted me. And this was some medical professionals went and analyzed search data looking for what searches are predictors for a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And they found that people who ultimately had a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer could be predicted by two combinations of searching for symptoms in the weeks and months prior to their diagnosis. In other words, these are people who have not been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer yet. But if they are searching for a combination of backaches or back pain and yellowing skin, that's just a dead giveaway. Now, oddly enough, yellowing skin is not in itself a predictor of a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. That can be all sorts of other things. But if you combine it with searches on back pain, that's an extremely good predictor. And again, there was another combination that was a very good predictor of an ultimate diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and that is indigestion and abdominal pain. And again, either of the two separately is not a predictor. You know, all sorts of other reasons for indigestion, all sorts of other reasons for abdominal pain. I mean, you know, appendicitis. But the combination of the two symptoms. In other words, if you can find somebody who's out there searching on indigestion and abdominal pain, this person in the next few weeks or months is very likely to, you know, end up with a doctor and have a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. I found that fascinating. Nobody has any comments on that.
Carole, request. When you keep flicking your cursor around the screen, it is driving my cat batty.
Your cat? Here, kitty, kitty. Okay.
Okay, so we're seeing that tracking people's searches online is not just for selling stuff to them. It could also help diagnose problems that they have.
Yes. And again, there were all kinds of examples of medical searches that turned out to be highly predictive. They have been able to predict by weeks sometimes outbreaks of flu, outbreaks of COVID, outbreaks of practically anything contagious by upticks in people's searches on symptoms. And this has turned out to be very, very useful. You know, you can say, oh my God, we're going to have a really serious flu epidemic this year. You know, we always get a flu epidemic in the fall. but you can predict it weeks ahead of time and stock up on medications, people, hospital staff, that type of thing. Again, very, very useful. Most of the useful predictions were in the medical field, but he's expecting it to expand. Okay, Tom, you want to?
Yeah, I'm first. This does look very useful, and I think its usefulness will increase. It could be done by governmental agencies or private firms, I guess, this kind of analysis. And I think we're going to have to end up relying on this kind of analysis since government agencies like NIH and so forth are being gutted right now. So we're losing our ability to predict outbreaks and trends like this. So this can be an important thing for our society.
Of course, this is not going to help too much with
it can also help
pinning down cases, numbers of cases. You know, like the wastewater testing that turns out to be our best predictor for numerical COVID cases. You still need people to do that.
Yes, to do actual testing. Okay, Stan.
My thought is that if we have a way of predicting pancreatic cancer, all cancers, if predicted, if early discovery is always the best thing to cure cancer, the sooner you can find it, are the people that are providing the data to demonstrate the connection between indigestion, abdominal pain, and pancreatic cancer. How is that person who's providing that information getting the benefit of that information? Is there any feedback loop to say, hey, you should go see your doctor? And my second thought is that I've heard some people talk about some time when you're going to have a sensor maybe in your stool or on in the surface of your commode that you can just pee on, and that can send information to your doctor regarding your health.
I have heard of that as an ultimate suggestion. At the time this book was published, there was no suggestion of, like big ad campaigns on the internet to let people know that if they've got these symptoms, they should see their doc and be checked for pancreatic cancer or, that type of thing. But again, this book was published in, what was it?
2017.
Yeah. So 8 years ago? I don't know, there may be, they may have carried it another step by now.
Well, that's pre-COVID.
Whatever. Am I next? So where is this pie in the sky notion that searches will be used for our benefit? Searches are used to sell us crap by the tar pit. And where does I would love for the government or somebody to steal my identity like the tar pit has and say, hey, send me an email. Looks like based on your searches, you should get into your doctor and be screened for X, Y, or Z. Easily doable. But how do you make that happen? Is there any economic interest? in the silicon tar pit to make that happen? The answer is none, or virtually none.
Well, certainly the medical profession would have an interest in making an economic interest in
The
making.
medical profession does not run Silicon Valley. I wish they did or had a bigger voice in it. They are not an altruistic culture up there. They just are not. They're in to make stockholders rich and make themselves rich, bottom line.
Okay, but what I'm suggesting is that the medical profession would benefit economically by hiring an advertising firm to put out the information on backaches and yellowing skin and indigestion and abdominal pain.
But we shouldn't have to go that far. Based on my searches, I get hundreds and thousands of emails and texts. Oh, it looks like you want me to sell you this. How does the medical profession or anyone else altruistic or economically altruistic get into that conversation? They're not. They're locked out by Facebook and Zuckerberg and everybody else. They have no economic. They would have to
look at how the medical profession has managed to tell all of us that smoking is likely to give you lung cancer. We all know it.
That's because the Surgeon General came out forcefully about it.
Right.
But
and you
it's
can't
not just the little warning on the cigarette package. It's a lot of.
Right. It was.
So I'm saying there is an economic incentive to find this kind of data and create that loop that you talked about.
Putting the tobacco companies, switching them from tobacco products to vape, that we forced them to do that because we had well-meaning people on both sides of the aisle back then. We do not now, and we may never have again.
Chris. Mr. Christoffel, you're next.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the original premise. Everybody lies. That's somewhat of an exaggeration because there are advantages and disadvantages to lies. There are advantages to being able to deceive people, but there are disadvantages. If a person gets caught as a lie, reputation is huge. Somebody tarnishes their reputation and they are in bad shape. They better go someplace else. There's really powerful incentive to not have a reputation tarnished. A lot of the mainstream media is suffering the consequences of years of misinformation. It is a disaster for one. Shakespeare says reputation is the most important thing. Being caught as a liar is a big problem. The other thing, so that's one reason to not lie. One reason to not lie is to protect one's reputation. Another reason to not lie is lying is a emotional blow to one's self. It is a denial of one's identity. It is a denial of the integrity of one's own self. and it can have devastating emotional consequences. Most people like to be authentic. They like to think of themselves as truth teller. They like to have a good opinion of themselves. It is a denial of a person's identity. It is a denial of who a person is to tell a lie. So, does everybody lie? I would say another thing. It's one of the lying is one of the most devastating things to relationships, and it's one of the most devastating things to society. There are strong incentives to not lie. It takes a lot of courage to not lie, but it is probably, as someone said many, many years ago, the best policy.
Somebody should tell Fox that.
Eric, you're next.
As far as anybody as old as me knows that it was several decades long efforts to get a just definitive warning about the adverse effects of cigarette smoke. Because let's see, when one of my classmates in college, we graduated in 1970, he got a chem degree, and he went to work for a chemical company. And on a camping trip in the early 70s, he told me that the tobacco company, it wasn't Philip Morris, I think it was American Tobacco Company, had commissioned their company to study for their own purposes their carcinogenicity of their cigarettes. He said he had told me he had found by gas chromatography over 40 carcinogens in the smoke, but they definitely did not want that published. Well, a few years later, he did anyway in an environmental magazine. Then a few years ago, another mutual friend and I tried to look him up, find out what happened for Konstantin Patrianikos. And my friend is, besides having a doctorate from MIT, he also is a professional librarian and has a master's in library science. And he could not find much of anything about him much after he published. We think they may have killed him. Those big guys don't play around.
I would say that Chris, on your comments, it depends a lot on what kind of society you find yourself in, whether lies are destructive of self or saving of self.
There's a great article by Alexander Solzhenitsyn called "Do Not Live by Lie."
Yeah, that
and
was
he is talking about being in the society of Russia under Stalin and how to not live by lie. It is an absolutely terrific article. So he would Alexander Solzhenitsyn would disagree with you.
Well, let me suggest that if you were living in occupied Poland during the Nazis, it was probably a good idea not to tell the truth about the Jews who were hiding in your neighbor's attic.
Yep. I agree. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions, but the basic concept that I stated is true, but there are, of course, exceptions, always.
Well, I am suggesting that there can be social circumstances that are very broad and no longer exceptions.
It takes courage to tell the truth. Person has to be willing to deal with the consequences.
Okay, I'm next. I would suggest that Chris has a pretty optimistic view of human nature.
Nope.
Well, of course
Not true. Not true.
Because I think our society has changed in the last decade or so. Lying has been normalized. It's not so much
Alternative truth.
not so much a hit to your reputation anymore. I mean, look at Trump. Most of what he says is untrue, and yet, people love him. For some, and for some, it's not self-destructive. It's a way of life. So I don't want to I agree that lying is a bad thing to do, but I think that it's been normalized in our society now, and
and the consequences.
The consequences to society are bad. But
it will lead to the collapse of society. That's
yes,
what I'm saying. If you want to tell the truth, telling the truth.
On a personal level, though, a lot of people don't feel that.
Then they will eventually live in a society that has collapsed.
Yes. Okay. Well, we agree on that. Okay, that's all I need to say about that then. Okay, Dean, you're next.
All right, yeah. And so I think we have all lied. And anybody who says they've never lied is a liar. So therefore,
we've all lied.
Most people with a moral backbone, which I firmly believe I have, kind of hate themselves even as the words are coming out of their mouth, right? I mean, but obviously some people don't, and I would call them psychopaths. And we have known for millennia that if you take a lie that's obviously a lie and you repeat it over and over and over again, it will become the truth to many people.
Yep. Tom.
Oh, I noticed last night when I was off the Fleet Farm that there's a sign over the door saying that court has ordered Archer Reynolds to provide information that smoking changes your brain or something like that.
It's on the door of every 7-Eleven I go into in San Diego.
And well, I just noticed it last night. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, it does change your brain. And as I said in the chat, nicotine was the best ADHD drug I've ever used. And they even did research on this in Germany, and it just quietly disappeared.
Yeah, I'm using it right now. And doctors agree. Nicotine wasn't put here by God for no purpose.
Yeah, but unfortunately, smoking is a bad delivery mechanism for nicotine, for our ADHD control. I know people with severe ADHD who are using nicotine patches, but this is very off-label.
Yeah, but it's not really nicotine that is the disaster for your lungs. It's smoking.
No, lungs and brain are two different things, Carole. Nicotine rewires your brain, sometimes in a bad way, sometimes in a good way. That's why I quit smoking in 2000, 25 years ago. The tar and all that, that's a whole nother issue.
I'm just saying
like
that
CBD versus THC or whatever.
You can get the advantages of nicotine without the disadvantages of smoking.
Yes, and I use patches very often.
Yeah, balancing the advantages with the disadvantages is a tightrope.
And when I've gone into the hospital and said, "What are you taking?" I said, "Well, I've got a nicotine patch in here," and they go, "Great, we'll bring you some more."
Okay, Don, you're next.
I'm really fascinated with everybody's comments. I'm just looking forward to the use of this thing for any individuals like us ourselves. Is there any chance that that those tools, and especially the one about the future, could be helpful to an individual or even a nonprofit or some? Is it going to be expensive to find out the truth about stuff, or is that such a big challenge that you'd have to be a multinational corporation to afford to do it, going through these, using these tools? I'm just wondering at what point and level this is applicable to any of us individually, in your thoughts.
Okay, you're asking me this question.
Yeah, I'll ask you first, and if anybody else has something to say, sure.
Well, certainly the author of this book, let's see if I can find it, has made public, okay, wait a minute.
I'm just curious about, how it is we're able to utilize this as a tool for
Okay.
training. Do you have something there?
The author of this book has made public all of his research methods, part of which involves you have to get these data sets from the people who have them.
That's what I wondered.
You can't just go out on the internet and look at the data set of everybody who made searches for the last 15 months. That data exists, but you have to get Google to give it to you, or you have to get the owner of that data set to give it to you. So to operate on. That's one of the problems.
About the 0.5% elite.
Right. Yeah.
I don't quite understand.
That's okay. Continue, Carole.
Okay. Well, as I'm saying, the author of this book, let's see. Well, let me just read you this bit. Google Trends has been a source of much of my data. However, since it only allows you to compare the relative frequency of different searches, but does not report the absolute number of any particular search, I have usually supplemented it with Google AdWords. That's AdWords, which reports exactly how frequently every search is made. In most cases, I have also been able to sharpen the picture with the help of my own trends-based algorithm, which I describe in my dissertation, Essays Using Google Data, and in my Journal of Public Economics paper, The Cost of Racial Animus on a Black Candidate, Evidence Using Google Search Data. The dissertation, a link to the paper, and complete explanation of the data and code used in all the original research presented in this book are available on my website. So he's doing his best to give anybody who wants it all of his tools.
Gotcha.
But he is incapable of convincing the people who have these great big data sets to give them to you. You have to do this if you want to be researching stuff.
Yeah. So there's proprietary.
Yeah, hang on. Big data is big money, and they're not giving it away.
Yeah, that's what I was wanting to get at.
Yeah.
Okay, David.
It's also kind of complicated.
Get closer to the mic, David.
It's complicated. And there are lots of explanations that might apply to most of this stuff. You only have to look at our group and our discussions for a little bit to come to the conclusion that persuading anyone, even if you have good data, is sometimes a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it is afternoon now. So do you have a conclusion, Carole?
No, this is actually the end of the presentation.
Okay, good.
The conclusion is what you care to take from it. But I would suggest that this is an absolutely fascinating book. I mean, okay, he's got an entire chapter on sex. And some of the information that he has found there is obvious and predictable, and some of the information he has found there is extremely counterintuitive.
Yeah, and that is how authors wrote me in. Give me something I already know, so I have a connection with you, and now tell me something I don't know, and it will have credibility.
Yes. And I would say, boy, did I learn things in the chapter on sex. There were many counterintuitive things there. A couple of them, I said, oh, you mean other women are like that?
I love counterintuitive.
And many of them were extremely counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
H. Tom.
Googling just now, I was surprised to discover that the average NBA pro player is 6'8". The average woman's player is 6 foot even. The shortest men's National Basketball Association player is 5'8".
Is this today or over the course?
A week ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's not over the whole course
evolved.
of the NBA.
It has evolved.
There are averages, but someone who's 5'8", who's a pro basketball player, he's got to be fast on his feet.
and they're on the bench. They're not starters.
Yeah. I will mention that my sister, who is my height, I mean, you know, like, well, actually, she's shorter than I am. She's 5 foot even.
Good Lord.
Loves to play basketball.
My cousins needed a pillow to get a driver's license at 5 even.
Yeah. And she has suggested for years that basketball be treated like boxing. You know, you have heavyweight boxing, you have lightweight boxing, you have categories.
People under 5'6", I would watch it.
If you had categories in basketball, but they were height categories rather than weight, she thinks it would be an interesting and more popular game.
It's a new ism, heighthism.
I think the difference of 8 inches between the average NBA player and the average WNBA player is bigger than the overall societal difference between.
Absolutely, it is.
And so that supports, Carole, your thesis that the men's game is vertical game and the women's game is a horizontal game.
Nope, that wasn't mine. That was
Well,
something.
whoever said that.
No,
Yeah.
no, but yes,
No,
because
that was
the women who are right, they're not picking the tallest women, they're picking the most skilled women, many of which happen to be tall. And that's why, to me, it is my college and NBA game of choice, because I love to watch good basketball, always have. When George Mikan, the first big man, George Mikan in Minnesota, was what? He's a small man now. He's a point guard almost.
Women's hockey is kind of similar, especially here in Minnesota, where we have excellent teams. It's not just guys hitting each other. It's a real skating demonstration when you watch the women.
I love it.
Okay, Eric.
Oh, yeah, the study I saw was about pro linemen, which are, I guess, mostly over 300 pounds now. I don't pay attention to sport. I don't know much, but they said, but within men above 300 pounds, other factors become much more important than additional weight.
Yeah, and newsflash, as I was getting settled in on my futon, the biggest change in college sports since college sports. Colleges and universities will now be allowed to pay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
College players millions.
That's
Yep.
Good presentation, Carole. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carole.
Thank you, Carole.
Well, I hope it will get at least a couple of you to go out and grab the book. He does have a second book out, which is called something like Don't Trust Your Gut. But I haven't read that one.
Yeah, so on the 28th, I'm going to do the future of hydrogen. And then sometime in August, presumably, I will be doing the future of music.
Oh, kind of Stan did something on that, I thought. Yeah.
No, I did something similar to that.
Oh, you did something.
Yeah.
Tom did, yeah.
What's next week? Anyone know?
I saw it on Meetup, but I forget.
I thought David said he had 2 people scheduled for next week and they were going to have to fight it out.
That's right. That's what
We
I saw.
sorted it out.
Let David tell us.
Ron Poole is going to.
But I don't see David. He says
Future of microplastic.
Oh my God.
That's next week?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, if anyone has a plastic cutting board, you probably should throw it away.
Oh, really?
What?
Really? You're ingesting plastic from my plastic? I love it.
Plus all the little grooves in the plastic that develop harbor a lot of bacteria.
Yeah, I wax my cutting boards with beeswax. I'll send you the link. It's beeswax and mineral oil, and oh my God. It takes about several applications, and then it's just plug and play.
Back to vertical grain walnut and teak then.
Right, and you use one side for raw meat and only raw meat, and you use the other side for cooked meat and veggies and whatever.
Well, I use a separate one for raw meat.
Yeah, and what I do is just spray it down with Costco Clorox cleaner, which kills every salmonella bug that's ever been invented. So, yeah, but
Eric,
yeah,
did you have something?
huh?
Oh, I thought Eric wanted to say something too.
Yeah, I did some research on that. I think among the top cooks and chefs and everything, and research a type of wooden ones called boost boards are the most respected. And the only downside is about every month you have to. I got one, and you have to rub it with a certain kind of oil that they sell. But there are other cheaper
No,
brands.
I'll post
And
it
then
on Meetup. There's expensive, it's called board butter, and it's beeswax, which is God's gift, and mineral oil. And once you get it soaked into the wood, it's plug and play. But yeah, I know about the plastic thing, and my philosophy is I'm old enough that I can ingest some of this stuff and it won't catch up to me,
Yeah.
and I won't have passed it on to my progeny and all that. You know, I'll take my chances. I know about the dangers, but it's very convenient.
Yeah, in the boost company, they recommend that you rub the oil in there at least once a month, depending on how much you use it. And
That
then,
is what I do.
And then after 24 hours, so you rub in this wax that they
Right. And it's actually fun. Back in the day when I thought waxing my car by hand was fun. But yeah, you stand in their kitchen, you rub this stuff in with a little sponge, and then you wipe it off. And then maybe first time you do it 2, 3, 4 times, and then you do it about once a month. And that board is impervious virtually. It's good, much better than a plastic one.
Sounds like taking care of cast iron skillets.
Very similar.
Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
But I can't lift a 12-inch cast iron skillet anymore with one hand.
David, I have a question for you.
What's that?
So, David, am I still on for the 21st then on Future of War?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to. New videos keep coming out. I don't know. I don't send you a list until shortly beforehand of the videos. You and Stan, I guess. Hopefully Stan, are you still there?
No, he's long gone.
No.
David, what is the 14th next week? I saw it briefly on Meetup, but I've forgotten it.
Warren Poole, I just changed it this morning. Warren Poole is going to do the future of plastics.